Hi everyone, welcome to Criminal Justice 201 Policing. I'm Professor Jason Ostro. This is week 7, Diversity in Policing. Let's get started. For this lesson, I'll explain how discrimination in policing has affected certain groups of people. I'll list and describe laws and policies that have impacted police employment, and then finally explain challenges that persist for minorities in policing. When we think about discrimination in policing, the first group of people that are generally talked about in that conversation in the field of academia and field of policing are women. And the reason is because policing has been a traditional male dominated profession really until the 1960s. And even after the 1960s, you could even say that it's still overwhelmingly male. The first female police officer, at least police officer in name only, was Alice Stebbins Wells, who you can see a picture of right there in front of you from the LAPD in 1910. And although she was a police officer, she performed a very, very limited role, and this continued for decades, really, again, until the 1960s when women started to become fully integrated into police responsibilities. So really from the end of World War II until the mid to late 1960s, we're talking about women performing a very limited role in policing, questioning of juveniles, administrative tasks, things of that nature. When we think about discrimination in policing against female officers, why does that happen? Why did it happen? Or why does it continue to happen, right? Possibly fear of change, physical stature. Maybe people make that argument that cops should be tall and strong and big. Strength, size, macho image of policing, right? Male behavior, and then also maybe jealousy. I like this picture here of this female officer for a lot of reasons, but she looks to me like a very professional-looking officer. But for her hair being in a ponytail, and that doesn't have anything to do with her gender. That has to do with a safety issue. Whether you're a male or a female and you have your hair in a ponytail, it provides a serious tactical disadvantage if somebody grabs that. But needless to say, I think what you're looking at otherwise is a very professional-looking police officer who looks readily capable of doing any necessary police work. And then the other group of people that we think about when we think about discrimination in policing traditionally, and this is in the field of policing and academics, is against black police officers. So the first documented black police officers were hired after the Civil War. That was in the mid 1860s, and that's interesting because it's 50 years approximately before the first female officer, right? So by 1910, there were 567 black officers in the United States and one female officer. First black police officer in the NYPD, and I mentioned that because we're here at BMCC, was Samuel Jesse Battle from 1912. There's a picture of him right there, right? So you can see that in terms of policing, still very, very male-oriented, and particularly white male-oriented, as it still is today, although that's changed significantly. When we think about laws and policies that affect policing, we go back to the 14th Amendment, these Reconstruction Amendments. And the 14th Amendment has different parts to it, but the part that we're interested in is the Equal Protection Amendment, right? So that, or the Equal Protection part, that you can't treat people differently based off of who or what they are. And we move forward through history for about 100 years into the 1960s when the United States was going through a lot of turmoil, civil rights issues, not unlike today. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964, this law specifically prohibited job discrimination based off of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, and has since been expanded. Like, you hear about sexual orientation, gender identity, disability status. And so this is something that exists with us today. When you fill out an application for a job, it might say at the bottom of that, we cannot discriminate based off of any of these categories, or like sexual harassment or discrimination is unlawful. A lot of this goes back to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So that shows you the importance of that. And then in terms of criminal justice, we have the Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968. And this provided a lot of funding for police departments and jurisdictions to help educate officers, start schools of criminal justice, training academies, study policing, and try and find out like what are some of the root causes of urban unrest of the 1960s and crime and things of that nature. And so when you think about places like John Jay, the BMCC Criminal Justice Academy, or the CUNY Justice Academy, you think about criminal justice schools and programs throughout the United States, many of them got their start as a result of this. Or we are living the legacy of this Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968 as criminal justice students. Now, when you think about minorities in policing today, a lot has changed since the days of Alice Stubbins Wells, as well as Samuel Jesse Battle. When you think about women in policing, according to the NIJ, National Institute of Justice, by 2019, females made up about 13% of police officers in the United States. And while they make up about 51% of people in the United States, you might say, well, that's incredibly low. It may be incredibly low, or it may be low, but it's higher than it was 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago. So the trend is going in the right direction. One of the questions is, how do you get more females to become police officers? Because if that's what we as a society want, we have to find people who want to do the job, right? So, now 1 in 10 police supervisors are female, women, and there are many organizations that cater to female police officers. National Center for Women in Policing, International Association of Women in Police, are just some, of the many. And so there are opportunities for women in policing, no question about it, that are much differentiated from how it was a few years back. Now, there are challenges for women in policing, right? Recruitment and hiring. And whenever I talk about like this issue in class, when I'm teaching this lesson live, I'll ask the question: should there be more female? Should 51% of police officers be female? Should, it's an interesting question. Should, and some people say yes, there should be, and others would say no. And my answer to that is, should 51% of kindergarten teachers be male, or 50%, 49%, right? Should it be roughly 50-50 split? And the reason that I make that point is because when you talk about what should or shouldn't be, that's difficult. You can talk about what is or isn't. So we can say that maybe there should be more female police officers, more representative of the general population. Maybe that's true. But you also have to find the people that want to do the job, right? And you have to find qualified people that want to do the job. So recruitment and hiring becomes difficult. And we may say we should have 50% of the kindergarten teachers in the United States should be male. Maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't. I don't know. But you have to find enough people that want to be kindergarten teachers, right? So again, it's more complicated than just saying it should be this or it should be that. All right, so those challenges women may face: recruitment and hiring, physical fitness standards, which are still, even though policing is much less of a physical job than most people think, the physical component is still something that can serve as a barrier because it deals with, strength and height and things of that nature. This idea of workplace harassment from colleagues, from male colleagues. Although what I will say is that my own experience, this is not based off of research, this is just my own anecdotal experience as a police officer. I didn't really see any harassment of female police officers based off of just their gender. What I would see is harassment from the general public towards female police officers. No question about that. And that's not something that you can control. So you can't change policy, you can't fire people, you can't do anything, you can't discipline them. But I would very regularly see, general public mouth off to female cops and, say very, very derogatory things to them. And unfortunately, when you're a police officer, that's comes with the job. There's nothing you can do to change that. I mean, you always have to act appropriately, and that's how you try and change it. But you can't, you can't snap back or make a complaint against somebody because they said something you don't like about your gender. Anyway. So I think that that's a real thing too. Pregnancy, family, dealing with attitudes from the general public, who may look at you differently because you're a female or whatever. And so it certainly can be very, very challenging for female police officers in that sense. When we talk about blacks in policing today, Bureau of Justice Statistics estimates that approximately 12% of police officers in the U.S. are African American. And that is actually very close to the national representation of blacks in the United States. It's 12 to 13%. It depends on 2020 census. But what happens is in urban areas, there's much more diversity, so it may not look that way. And then historically, there's been these concerns of what's called double marginality, where this phenomena that white officers treat blacks as though they're treating their own, or act towards blacks like they're treating members of their own race, differently than everybody else. And then members of the black community look at black police officers almost as like sell out to their community, so on and so forth. This doesn't just happen among black police officers. It happens among really all different types of racial and ethnic minority police officers too, with this phenomenon, this double marginality concept. There's also this idea of tokenism that racial and ethnic minority police officers will be propped up by the police department, put on display, so to speak, because in a show of diversity, in a show of inclusiveness, right? Sort of like being used. So this is all sort of part of some of the challenges of minorities in policing, as the research indicates. And we also think about other minorities in policing, and we think about Hispanics, for example. And this data is somewhat dated from 2007, but there isn't really more updated data available at this time. And that approximately 11% of police officers in the United States are Hispanic, and that closely mirrors the U.S. population as a whole. Now, however, in cities, large cities in the United States, the Hispanic population is much larger. Sometimes 25%, 30%, even 40%, especially for police departments in the South and the West. I saw a statistic the other day, or some data the other day in the New York Times that indicated that the NYPD was approximately 25% Hispanic, which is probably close to represents the general population of the city. We have to wait to see the 2020 data comes out on the census, but it's probably pretty close. And then you think about Asians in policing; they comprise very, very small percentage of police officers nationwide, 2.7%, right? So recruitment is an issue, and vastly different cultures when we talk about Asians. Anything from China, Japan, Korea to South Asia, Pakistan, India, right? We have a wide variety of cultures and customs and ethnicities in there. And also, when you think about policing in the 21st century, you have to think about not just racial and ethnic minorities in terms of policing and gender, but religious orientation too, right? And can you make reasonable accommodations for people who are deeply religious and want to be police officers? I used to work for a very short period of time. I worked in the 7-0 precinct in Brooklyn, which is central Brooklyn, and it has a very, very diverse array of police officers, as well as a diverse community. It has a big Russian-speaking community. It has a Latino community. It has a Middle Eastern community. It has a West Indian community, and the police in that precinct really reflect very nicely the community. And we also in that precinct had some Orthodox Jewish police officers who needed, requested accommodations for Fridays off because of religious reasons, and Muslim officers who wanted to grow facial hair because it was sort of against their religion to shave, right? So police department requires that you shave, requires that you do certain things, and so the police department tries to make these accommodations for people based off of religious observations when they're in fact legitimate. But again, you have this perception of double marginality that comes into play. Then we also think about in the 21st century in diversity in policing this idea of sexual orientation, right? Which policing, no question about it, was traditionally very male, predominantly white, and overwhelmingly heterosexual. Now, that being said, gay and lesbian police officers are widely accepted and widely part of police departments throughout the United States. And I think that the attitude towards that has changed dramatically over the last 20 years or so. But the one thing that makes it difficult to assess is that that's not something that police departments necessarily ask you. I know that in the NYPD, they don't ask, what your sexual orientation is. They do ask, are you married? They do ask, do you have a domestic partner? They do ask, who do you live with? They do ask, who's your next of kin? You're required to put that information down because, God forbid, something happens to you as a cop. They need to know who they have to reach out to. For legal reasons, if you're, God forbid, police officers killed in the line of duty or injured or in the hospital or something, they need to know, who the next of kin is, right? Anyway, so they don't ask you, what's your sexual orientation, and so it's very difficult to say, what percentage of police officers are, gay and lesbian, or have a variety of sexual orientation. So, but it's something interesting, and I think that there is probably a pretty good acceptance in the last 10, 15 years of people who are, who have different sexual orientations, non-heterosexual sexual orientations, because police officers tend not to really care so much about that stuff. What they really care about is, are you a good cop? Are you trustworthy? Can you get the job done? Are you going to get yourself in trouble? Or are you going to get somebody else in trouble? Are you going to get hurt, or are you going to get somebody else hurt? Police officers don't necessarily care about, are you black, white, Hispanic, Asian, are you woman, are you female, are you male, are you gay, straight, lesbian, whatever. Those things to police officers tend not to be important. Many people on the outside that look at police departments and think, they're all the same, they'll think the same, act the same. And in some ways that's true, but in other ways it's not true, because police officers accept each other no matter who or what you are, as long as you're a good cop. And what does it mean to be a good cop? Well, if you're a good cop, you're a good guy, a good person, you're a cop, and you're a good police officer, then all that matters is that you're doing the job for the right reasons. You're out there trying to help the public. You don't get yourself in trouble. You don't get other people in trouble. You don't get yourself hurt. You pick up the slack for others. You don't leave work for other people. You're competent. You're confident. People can rely on you. That's what they care about. So all that other stuff is just not that really all that important, I think. Okay. Anyway, so it's an interesting subject nonetheless. All right, so we have a couple assignments for this week. Make sure that you read the Women in Policing reading that I put up there. I'm only asking you to read the executive summary, which is like the first 2 or 3 pages. It's a pretty long document, but the executive summary of the report is really a summary. That's all it is, just the summary of the larger report. So I'm asking you to read that. There's a video, short video. It's a promotional video from the Austin Police Department, but it's actually pretty interesting, and you can hear these women's stories. So women of the APD, they talk a little bit about what made them want to become police officers and what it's like. There's also a really, really interesting video on there called "What It Means to Be a Black Officer Today," which was from about 5 years ago, but it was at the height of the first, what I'll call the first Black Lives Matter movement. The 2014, 2015. When there was a lot of unrest, and there was some shootings, and there was some police shootings, and shootings where cops got shot and killed, and it was when it first peaked, and then kind of like dissipated for a few years, and then now it's back up in the news again. So so I think it's still very relevant. Also, I want you to complete reflection assignment number 2. Right, make sure that you do that. That's a big one, right? 5% of your overall grade. The questions are essentially the same. What have you learned from the last 3 lessons that you didn't know before? And then you have a discussion board assignment that's due Thursday. No response is required. Okay, I hope you all have a very good week, and I will see you online.